Welcome to the Academic Woman Amplified podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Mazak, tenured full professor, mom of three, and firm believer that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Hello, I am so happy to have on the podcast today, Angel Kaur. Now, she's going to introduce herself in just a second, but I want you to know that she is such an amazing member of our original Amplify cohort. So she's going to be talking to us about her experience pre-tenure, how she created a true pre-tenure pivot for herself, and how a lot of the things that she learned in Amplify when she enrolled in May 2019 are bearing fruit right now for her in 2021. And that includes many publications that have been submitted and are now in press, and a real kind of change in the direction of her career. I can't wait until you hear this amazing Amplify success story. So here she is. Will you introduce yourself to the podcast listeners?
Absolutely. So like Kathy said, my name is Angel Kaur. I'm an assistant professor of neuroscience at UNC Asheville. What other things do you want me to introduce about myself? Those are the academic things.
Those are the academic things. Tell us about, before we go any further, tell us about your podcast, because podcasters like to support podcasters. So
podcasts are awesome. So for many years now, I've been having my students do a science communication assignment in which they create podcasts based on a question that they find interesting. They go find some research, and then they have to create a science communication piece of work that is geared towards a more broad audience than just me as the instructor. And this was not something that I had set out to do, as like having my own podcast or anything. Mm-hmm. But these students, these wonderful students at UNCA, they kept surprising me with these incredible pieces of work that they created. And I couldn't stop showing them to people. And so I was like, I'm just going to put together an actual podcast series. So the podcast series is called co-hort, and it features work that was created by my students in my classes. Some of the episodes are created by first semester freshmen, and they are amazing. And I love that I get to brag about them. So you can find co-hort on anywhere that you find podcasts for the most part, but certainly on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and such. And you can see all the research that went into this work if you go to the podcast website at co-hort.com and check out the show notes pages. I include all of the research that the students did in order to create this work. And in fact, they've been responsible for a lot of the copy that ends up on the website as well. And it's, I share that with them now, right? Now that it exists and we're doing these assignments in class, they have a link to the website. So they have examples of really good work, which turns out to be good pedagogy too. So it's a nice closed loop.
It is. And I think it's like very representative of your approach to pedagogy. So, but let's start, not the beginning, but let's start at the beginning of when we met, which is that you were actually in the founding cohort of Amplify. And when you came in, some of the things I remember that you were kind of trying to work through was that you were in this interdisciplinary department and you were trying to figure out kind of where you fit. And you also were like kind of getting pulled towards teaching and learning, even though your background is more solidly in kind of lab science. So tell us about kind of where you were at that point in your career.
Yeah. So I got my PhD in cell molecular neuroscience. I used to work on pheromone signaling. I found the work really fascinating. I love neuroscience. I got into it just because I had the opportunity at the grad school I was in to pick just whatever I wanted to do. Yeah. And I sat down with myself and was like, neuroscience seems interesting. We keep taking these medications. We have no idea how they work. And that turned out to be really great. But I've always been interested in sciences and lab sciences. And so that was a huge part of my identity. And after I finished my PhD, I got a chance to be a lecturer at UNC Asheville and then got to move into a tenure track position. Mm-hmm. And that process of being a lecturer for a few years, and I didn't have a lab, and I got into the teaching aspect of it and coming back into the liberal arts, because at UNC Asheville is the liberal arts university in the UNC system, it felt like coming home because I had learned all about the liberal arts Kool-Aid when I went to college at Bryn Mawr College, which is one of the Seven Sister schools. And I just got very hooked by the teaching thing. I think before I even got into a classroom, I was in a workshop learning about how to teach students to do critical thinking in the classroom. And that was it. I was like, okay, this is great. But of course, your science aspect is a part of you. And so as you start your tenure track job, you open up your lab. I was really excited to do that. And yet, as you have said so many times, I'm sure on the podcast, there's just too much, right? There's too much to do. You can't research your teaching and care about it as much as I was trying to care about it and still run a successful lab and still do the service that's expected of you, which, podcast listeners can't see this, but from India, and I'm a queer brown woman in STEM, there's a lot about me that creates new pockets of work that other people don't have to do. Yeah. Even if it's just, students emailing me and being like, Dr. Kaur, I cannot function. How do I prioritize this list of work? And I'm like, well, you came to the right person because I've read everything about productivity and I help them. And I love doing that. And so I think that what made me come to Amplify, as everything in my life is complete random impulse. I saw it and I was like, this sounds like something that could help me, was that overwhelm. You talk about that overwhelm and how it doesn't have to be how academia works. And that really resonated with me because I felt like I was, the university's never going to love you back. And I was trying to get it to do that. And that wasn't the right mindset. But as someone who did grow up in India, and my parents went to college, but in India. So I was kind of first gen here in the United States.
Yeah.
And they don't have teaching positions here. And so I was once again entering into the space, not really knowing what was going on or how to do things. And so I really wanted some support that came outside my university, just because I was drowning. Yeah. I was straight up drowning. I cried in those Amplify calls and the first summer when we did them. Yeah. And what I got through that program was so much more clarity. And just being able to say that, I can say that really easily now that I was burnt out and dying and buried. I couldn't have said that before I went through Amplify and had to actually, that I think it's the second spoke where you sit down, you write down all the things that you're doing.
Yeah.
And that was my aha moment of like, oh, I'm trying to run 2 research programs at the same time. That's madness. And I think the other thing that Amplify really helped me with was the idea that you can't be 100% of yourself for all the things that you're responsible for. Right. And this past spring, one of the reasons I'm here is I've had a really productive academic writing year. I submitted my 4th manuscript yesterday of just this year.
That's amazing.
It's been really great. And it's, the 2 years of learning all of these things, and it's finally coming into fruition. The reason I was able to get out 4 manuscripts, 2 of which are already in press this year alone, the 3rd one's under review, no doubt the 4th one will go under review as well and we'll be fine, is I was walking around the house because I was teaching online, telling myself, just remember, you have to be a B teacher this semester. You have to be a B teacher this semester. So your voice was with me through that process to be able to find that priority that, I'm trying to go up for tenure. And this is the piece that's missing from my portfolio is my research. And so let's put it out there. And so that, those were pieces that really helped me turn my life around a little bit.
That's awesome. So I want to just repeat the thing about, or just dig into the thing about being a B teacher, because what I tell people in Amplify and in the programs, right, is that you can't be 110% A+ at everything all the time. Dear listeners, I want you to understand that Angel is 110% A+, great, awesome teacher. And she's also allowed to say, oh, well, this year is going to be a year that I crank out publications. So I'm just going to turn the volume down on the teaching. And I'm sure, because I saw some of your screenshotted student feedback things, that you still, to the students, seemed like an A+, totally awesome teacher. But for you, it's just a matter of turning down the volume on something so that gives you a little space to turn up the volume on other things.
Yeah. And I can give you some pretty specific choices that I made this semester to become that quote B teacher. One of them was I gave the students the textbook to read or videos that had been made by other people rather than making my own videos, which I'm also a digital person who does a lot of artistic work in the digital space. Visual aesthetics are important to me. And so I know that it's going to be more stressful for me to try and create work that's kind of not as good as I want it to be. That'll be frustrating. So I just chose to not do that. And when they requested that I put more of my voice in, I was like, okay, but I'm just going to turn on my iPad, start drawing and talking. And when I'm done, I will turn it off. There will be no editing. And they were like, that's fine. Yeah. And that's not a choice I would have made if I was putting my teaching at the very top of the pile. The other thing that it came down to was, I've got an R&R waiting, I've got 2 hours, and I've got grading. I'm going to let the grading wait a day.
Yeah.
So it was those kinds of very deliberate choices. If I was going to be the most responsive, most amazing teacher, I would have done the grading first.
Sure.
Did it still get done before a lot of people usually get grading done? Sure, it did. Still like within a week or 2 weeks, right? It's just in those smaller moments, what it helped me do was let go of the guilt, because a lot of academia is built around like it's a calling. You care about your students. You're there to inspire and grow, and that's all wonderful, but I'm not going to erase my own self and needs and all of that in order to make that work, because academia doesn't have to be toxic. It can be a calling without being that. And so that was the way I was dealing with my own guilt of, there's a student email waiting, but it's going to keep waiting because I want to get this done first. Right. And mindset work has been my secret weapon through all of this, is figure out a way to think about it differently. It's really helpful.
Yes, 100%. And so much of the choices you just described are just like choices of intention. Like instead of letting yourself be bowled over by things or being reactive, it's being intentional. Like I'm not going to react to every email that comes through immediately. I'm not going to react to other people's ideas of emergencies or even sometimes, like as much as we love them and want to care for them, the students freak out about things that aren't like that they don't really need to be freaking out about at the moment. And so it's just like, well, I am intentionally deciding that this is my priority right now. And the other stuff, I will still, it's like, you can't not be excellent at it. Like you're still going to be excellent at teaching, even though to you, and this is a thing, right? Like we put the bar so high in our heads for everything, and not to blame the victim, because we're told that the bar needs to be high. Or I think the worst, right, is like, you don't know what the bar is.
Yeah.
So absolutely. You just are like, strive. Yeah.
That's something that I've certainly experienced a lot of, and also with like picking up hats to make yourself more indispensable, because it is a really stressful time to be in academia.
Yeah.
And I guess in that also I've chosen intentionality. If I must wear hats, I will choose what hats to wear.
Yes.
And that choice last summer turned out to be a really good one. I knew nothing about online teaching before the pandemic happened. I happened to be on leave in the spring, and I sat down with myself and said, you need to get excited about this because that's the only way you're going to get through it.
Yeah.
And I am now one of the second most expert person in digital learning at our university.
Amazing.
Because I just leaned into it and chose to see the opportunity rather than the challenge. I think that's how I put it in my COVID impact statement.
Right. Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about what we've been calling, like your pivot towards, which you were starting to work on and think about. So you already described in this conversation that you were kind of trying to, at the beginning of your career when I met you, right? You were trying to like do this stuff about kind of researching your own teaching and improving pedagogy, and at the same time run like a neuroscience lab. And this is a problem that so many of the people that we work with in our programs have, which is that they feel excited about two different things. And when we make people do that mission statement thing, the biggest resistance we get from people, and in your case, it's a little different because you're talking about like research on teaching, but a lot of times we hear like, the teaching is so important to me and the research is too, or I'm going to move into this admin position. That's my goal, is admin. So I can't make the admin line up with my research. And the result is that you're like this person who's like so pulled because you're trying to hold up too many things. So could you talk about your process of figuring out like what way you were going to go and deciding to just go one way and to not do all the things?
So I'm actually really, really terrible at making those types of big decisions. However, the universe has blessed me in that I usually don't end up having to. The decision kind of gets made for me. I mean, this is so true. Like I applied to 14 colleges. There's only one that gave me enough financial aid. I applied to 6 or 7 graduate schools. Only one let me in. It happened to be an excellent school that was really wonderful for me. And so I've learned to kind of trust when the universe kind of shuts things down for me.
Yeah.
And COVID kind of did that. I was on leave. I also have chronic pain issues, got lots of things with me. And I was finally at a point where I could take that break. And, you know, I'd been through reappointment and I was like, okay, I need to take care of myself. I'm going to go on leave. So I was on leave. And I had still 5 research students doing the neuroscience research in my lab. And then March happened and they had to leave.
Yeah.
And everything just died. I worked on, you know, cell culture. The cell culture is gone. I had fruit flies. The fruit flies are gone. Any experiments that were underway, they're gone. Everything's gone.
Yeah.
And so in effect, you know, knowing that and knowing that I had asked to teach online, and so I wasn't going to be on campus anyway, like, okay, well, here's a time period where I get to just focus on the SOTL. So let's see what that looks like.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, even before that, I started to kind of make peace with it. And that's where the Brains program comes in. I was also a part of, right after I finished the core part of Amplify over the summer of 2019, I had been accepted into an NSF-funded advanced grant program called Brains. And I thankfully have a sticker of them on my computer so I can always tell people what it is that Brains stands for.
Oh, good.
And it stands for broadening the representation of academic investigators in the neurosciences.
Nice.
So it's a bunch of neuroscience people that have interest in academia, but at different levels. We've got some folks working in, you know, R1 research universities and folks like me who are in liberal arts environment. And it was a life-changing healing experience to be in that space with, we had a retreat together in Islandwood off the coast of Seattle. And it took away so much of the, I'll call it debris that's left behind in you when you experience, you know, micro and macroaggressions and injustices and bias and all of those things. And being in this small space with all these people that really saw each other. I don't know how they did this. They built this incredible community with just so much honesty and love for each other. And when those people, right, the people that you really respect and you're actually being your full authentic self with, echo back to you the things that you know are kind of true, the things that Kathy's told you are kind of true, like you really love your teaching, you have such cool ideas for this stuff. I don't see anyone doing this other kind of stuff. Like nobody else has a podcast series that their students are making. But there's lots of other people researching neuroscience things who are doing it better than you. And so that experience kind of already had solidified that for me. And I think that was part of what gave me that space to just take the room to heal myself and realign my life a little bit. I went back into, you know, art that I had left behind just, I don't even know how long ago. And now I have an actual functioning art business as well.
Amazing.
That does overlap with the pedagogy sometimes, but I think a lot of it was just accepting what's around me. My cells kept dying and everyone kept asking me about the cool teaching stuff I'm doing, right? It kind of came down to that. And it required a lot of work on my part. I'll be honest about that. Letting go of the research lab. I can remember every glass bottle in my lab that I happily wrote my initials on, feeling like, yes, I finally arrived. I have my own lab. Look at me now.
Right.
And I had to let that go. I had to let go being that researcher that, you know, as you're going through grad school, everybody kind of expects you to be, even though that was never where I was going to end up. And accepting that there is different work for me that I am better suited for. I think that's the thing that really sold me is I can make a change with the other SOTL related, pedagogy related, now faculty development related work that I'm doing.
Yeah.
In a way that I would not be able to do with the research lab. Other people can do the research lab work better than me, but I think I have something unique on this other side.
100%. So tell us about some ways that you've really leaned into that scholarship of teaching and learning stuff and changes you've made. I think you got a position, didn't you? So tell us about all those things.
So again, COVID kind of, I think I put again in my COVID impact statement that it closed a lot of doors, but opened a lot of Zoom rooms, right? There was an opportunity to connect with people in a way that I hadn't seen before till Amplify, really, right? Amplify I'm also really grateful for that because we had all our meetings on Zoom. So I knew how to create community in Zoom.
Yeah.
I've been in a community and I knew what it took. And that helped a lot in the online teaching. But, moving into the summer and with COVID and being like, okay, I have to learn how to do this now and do this online teaching well. And we had a course that was offered by our UNC System Digital Learning Initiative about designing effective online courses. Mm-hmm. And I got a lot out of that experience, and they happened to ask for associate faculty fellows. They just sent out this email and it was like, mostly you're going to be watching discussion boards. And you've seen me in your Facebook group. I love me some discussion boards.
Yes.
And so, as this was happening and I kind of started gaining steam on the work that I wanted to do with the online learning, and I turned to my partner and was like, I should go for this, right? And he was like, you should absolutely go for this.
Yeah.
So I ended up at a position at the UNC system level in the digital learning team as an associate faculty fellow for this course. Mm-hmm. And it's just snowballed from there into giving me more space to talk to other people about the pedagogy, which again reaffirmed that I have learned a lot and I have got a lot of interesting ways of looking at things that are unique. It opened doors to doing a lot more workshops for faculty. I had gotten to this point where I was like, I think I need to be on the other side of the faculty development equation, but that doesn't mean people are going to give you workshops to do. And here they hired these 5 people and said, please do workshops every week. And we were like, oh my God, what? But it's been, again, the opportunity to connect with people across the UNC system, to be able to share, ways in which I approach teaching and have that kind of just being able to think about it more in more situations in different ways and with that sole focus. And I think that was a very Amplify thing, right? Like you have that one thing that is the thing. And I also made the decisions that I made on what I was going to take up based on that one thing, right? So the mission statement in my head of who is it that I want to end up being? Yeah. And how do I want people to see me? And then making the choices that actually directly aligned with that. Because there are things I said no to. And I'm going to be stopping the work with the associate faculty fellows at the end of the summer because I've gotten a position as a faculty fellow at our Center for Teaching and Learning. And I want to put my focus there. And we as a campus are not going to have as much digital learning as some of the bigger campuses will once we're able to safely come back because liberal arts. So, yeah. And yet now I've gotten this incredible toolkit. So I can actually say on my expertise list, digital learning and faculty development, because I've done enough of those things to be able to bring that out. So it was a lot of small intentional decisions, aligning the work with where I wanted to go. And here, I haven't told you this, and I'm going to tell you this, and I know you're going to be excited. Okay. I'm sure the listeners will be excited too, but really this is for you.
Okay.
A couple of weeks ago, I got an email from someone out of the blue saying, hey, so I wanted to bring someone to my university to talk about science at the intersection of other disciplines, and someone mentioned your name. Would you be interested?
Oh, yes.
And you can imagine every gif of people throwing champagne everywhere. That was what was happening here. Because that in that moment, I was like, that's it. That's what Kathy had said, where you have this identity and then people know you as this person. Yeah. And that was the identity that I wanted. And so...
yeah. It's so referable. And it's so exact. Like, I love too, that the words that person used are the words that you've been putting out. Like, that's how you described your work when you were talking about it in Amplify. So like, it's so exciting that like the universe like echoes that back to you. And that means that you are crafting that identity for yourself and that path for yourself in a clear way. And that is so amazing. Congratulations. Yay.
Thank you. I'm so excited. I think currently I'm planning to do a film studies related thing.
Awesome.
And have them watch a movie and then lead a discussion on it from the science perspective.
Nice. So tell us about how your publications and your choices of places to publish kind of help reinforce that identity that you're building.
Absolutely. So my scholarship of teaching and learning is going to have a focus in STEM ed, because that's the courses that I teach for the most part are neuroscience courses.
Mm-hmm.
Lucky for me, maybe there's a flagship journal for the Journal for Undergraduate Neuroscience Education.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been a part of that group, the Faculty for Undergraduate Neuroscience, for a while. I've done some poster presentations. And again, the universe, I did a poster last summer on my podcast project and received an email from the folks that run the workshop saying, hey, if any of you want to write a paper, we will waive publication fees for you. Here's a deadline.
Nice.
And that was the first paper that I got in and got submitted, because I know myself, ADHD, deadlines are helpful, especially if they're external. And the process of writing that first article is really what unlocked it all for me. So I got to go back into the systems that I had learned from you. Trello is my external brain, and found I have a workspace that's just Kathy's writing templates. So I pulled one out from there to start planning this article. And as I sat down to write it, I also was really happy to see all of the little pockets of writing I've been doing on discussion boards here and there, or emails to students and all of that. I've grown as a writer without really recognizing it. And so the actual writing process was not hard, especially for that first article, because this is a project I'd been developing for 5 years.
Yeah.
And the first article is about the podcast assignment, is in press with the Journal of Undergraduate Neuroscience Education, coming out later this summer. The entire thing just lays out the process of the assignment and why it's scaffolded in the way that it is to allow for students to reach these really high benchmarks on deep learning and effective science communication, which, my God, the last 18 months have shown us how important effective science communication really is.
Yes.
And something that isn't typically taught explicitly, really, to most people as part of their training. People go outside of their training to find it, kind of like me coming to you to learn about writing productivity, because no one teaches you that just as being an academic.
Right.
And so it's become part of my mission to kind of provide at least my students that opportunity to really be able to look at that. And of course, there's lots of universe moments.
There is.
I taught an entire course last fall on science communication that I had decided to teach before the pandemic hit. And it was a freshman seminar. So that was really wonderful as well, to be able to explore this very timely thing and see the change in the students in terms of how comfortable they felt actually navigating the world that it is right now, with a little bit more understanding of how to find the right answers and find the reliable science. But, when I sit down to write the podcast project, it's so easy. It's like, I know exactly every choice that I've made. And I have learned that one of the things that people appreciate is I'm good at describing process and series of choices that can be made to allow for certain things to happen, or just how I think through things. And it's something that I'm grateful I can do, because often, I'm sure you've had this experience, you go and ask someone, hey, you wrote 6 papers last year. How'd you do that? And they're like, I don't know, man. I just locked myself in the room and my collaborators were breathing down my neck. And so I got it done.
Yeah.
And so to me, who's someone who loves processes, templates, I also have slide deck templates for all of my various workshops. Thank you so much for everything you've taught me. Being able to have a framework, right? This is how I'm going to approach this process. This is how long it will take, and the places where I can start and stop, and where I'm going to need support. No one ever had that till I came and did this work with you. And so knowing that I'm also good at explaining process, I kind of lean into it more. And people, again, universe echoes back that, yes, this is helpful. People can see the steps that you take, which makes it easier for them to take those steps. But not everyone thinks constantly.
Not everyone thinks
constantly.
So
after that first article, everything kind of made a little bit more sense, because it was the first time I was trying to implement the strategies that I'd learned. Honestly, I felt like such an Amplify failure till this year, because I hadn't written anything. But as you've taught us, writing is bigger than words on the paper. And I had been writing all this time.
Absolutely.
Now it's just coming together. And so I will say 4 manuscripts in 6 months is only happening because, 1, most of them are things that I'd been working on for a while.
Right.
2, I have the most incredible partner in the world who will cook me dinner and bring me snacks so that I don't forget to eat. And also who works in the Writing Center at UNC Asheville as one of the folks there who can constantly read my articles and give me feedback. So
nice.
It truncates the amount of time I have to give to get feedback and clean things up.
Yeah.
And after that one, now I had a system. And to me, everything is so much easier when I have a system, if I know how I'm going to do it. And I think some of that's just my ADHD brain. Like I need to know, how do I get to the end product? What's the end product look like?
Right.
And each paper after that, the bulk of the actual quote writing, pen to paper, hasn't taken that long, but it's because I've been spending all the time figuring out what the outline's going to be, getting all the figures ready, knowing exactly what I'm going to say, so that when I sit down to actually write, it's all there and it just flows out. And that I know is not as easy for everyone. And I completely understand that. And it's possibly the echoes of someone in my childhood who told me that I would never have good writing expression coming back to be like, ha ha ha, yes, I can. But the process of actually writing the papers then became much less intimidating.
Yeah.
And I also know that I'm a fairly harsh critic of myself. Also, grading students' papers has made me much better at writing.
Oh, that's interesting. Talk about that a little bit.
I think it's that because I was doing so much reading and feedback for other students. So like for the podcast project, for instance, they have to write up their whole script and send it to me, right? So I'm sitting there and I'm reading through the script and trying to figure out, where are they tripping up? What doesn't make sense? Where are the transitions that are missing? All these things. It's silently been building up my capacity to notice those things really well. So I've become a really good editor of my own work. As I read through it, I can immediately, even before it gets to my partner, I can see where the transitions are missing, where I'm not making a connection explicit enough. And I don't know, maybe other people don't have this experience, but to me, it helped.
Well, also, it sounds to me like you've been able to figure out your process. And so what works for you? And I think it's just great to hear somebody talk about that, because somebody else might be like, okay, well, when I write, I need to free write, or I need to like draft the whole thing and then go back and move the sections around and whatever. I'm like you, that I really think, like, for myself, if I can get the structure right, the words can come fast for me. But you have to know you and how you work. So it sounds too like this has been a process of figuring that out. And
so
also,
much trusting yourself, trusting yourself.
Yes.
And I think it's, things that I learned from Amplify and from Brains, and just kind of being okay with understanding who I am, because I also didn't know that I had ADHD till 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. So that's all been part of this whole rolling process of coming into my own. But knowing more about ADHD and how it works and how much internal motivation and interest are going to drive productivity in a way that other stuff just won't. External deadlines, yes, they'll work, but an internal deadline, I want to get my 4th paper done and submitted. So when I come and talk to you on the podcast, I get to say that I've done 4. Yes. That's a huge motivator for me.
Yeah.
Knowing that with class prep, you talk about corralling it because it can take over everything. For me, I would find myself stressing that I wasn't working like other people, both with writing and with class prep. Yeah. And most people have their entire class prepped before the semester starts. Most people sit down and have a certain writing process that's not like mine is. And instead of trying to fit into their model, in fact, I don't even use your model the way that you've taught it to us, right? I don't time block the same way. And I shared this on Momentum recently, that I have buckets of tasks, and I let my interest and the time that I have and the energy that I have dictate what that task is. And some of that's ADHD, some of that's chronic pain and how many spoons you have every day. All the things kind of came together to create my particular process. With teaching prep, for instance, I get hyper creative close to deadlines. This is just a thing. Mm-hmm. So if it is the night before the class and I come up with a cool new thing I can try in class the next day, and I had spent 3 hours, several weeks ago devising the class plan for that day, that's time that got wasted.
Yeah.
But I wasn't doing it my own way before because I felt like, but I'm doing it wrong. Like I'm going to be stressed and whatever.
Yeah.
So I've been gathering evidence of my own effectiveness at certain ways of working. So I can do things in a way that feels authentic, which then allows me to do more things. Because, one of the things that everyone says when they hear the just things I have done this last year is, are you still taking care of yourself? And I'm like, I take so much care of myself. I think that's why I can do all these things. And some of that is, recognizing how you function, what makes you more excited to do the work that you do, and not judge yourself for how you do that work.
Yeah.
The biggest secret to me being able to do any of this right now is I've been able to actually address my inner critic and work it down to a place where it's not. I know that Tara Moore would not agree with what I do here. My inner critic comes up, and instead of saying, thank you, I don't need you, I say, here's a list that says you're wrong. Bye-bye.
Nice. Yeah.
But that's more effective for me.
Yeah.
And so the constant refrain someone with ADHD will hear is, well, you never finish anything. In the last 18 months, I have finished 2 coloring books. I have finished 5 classes that were completely different preparations, like 5 total in the class year. I have submitted 4 articles. I have gotten 4 conference presentations accepted into a single conference. It's a neuroscience teaching conference. I just wanted to see if I could do it. And so I did. And I'm really excited to share all the things. And so, I can't have that negative voice that's going to take away my energy and judge me for waiting till the night before to decide what I'm going to do in the class the next day. Right. And that doesn't mean that the students don't have a full schedule or know what topics it'll be. It's how am I going to engage them in that topic? And I like having that freedom. And I wouldn't have given myself that freedom 3 years ago.
Right.
But a lot of just having to spend time with myself and really be okay with who I am, right? You sit down and you look inside and you say, am I actually afraid of anything there? And if you can just say no at that point, it's so freeing. It's so freeing.
Yeah.
And that has been at the crux of all of these things happening.
Yeah.
Because nobody else would think to make an infographic syllabus in actual full infographic form. Because, well, internal judgment, right? That's not what a syllabus looks like. That's not how you're supposed to do this. And I just was like, well, if I need to make a syllabus right now, the only way it's getting done is if it's an infographic. And that opened up so much. It was just a personal choice that I made. And it opened up so many things. Like I've done workshops on that. I've got one of my manuscripts that's out is on that. I've got a second follow-up study where we've got all this data that I need to process so that we can write another manuscript. And it's made my students happy, which makes me really happy as well, to be able to see something that is different and engaging and shows them that the instructor is actually like, you are not all black and white people that are all just exactly the same. I'm using font colors here, though I realize my choice of words was weird. Right? Like everyone is a 3-dimensional human being. And here's me as a 3-dimensional human being. And let's do this. That was a lot of answers to your questions, but that's just what I do.
Yeah, but I loved it. And I want to just emphasize, like, you've become an expert on yourself.
Yes.
And that is really powerful. On top of that, like you mentioned, that self-trust, that like me leaning into me more is going to create the best result for everybody, for me, for my students, for my writing, for everything. So I actually think that's like kind of a great place to end, because you really said everything. So I just want to congratulate you, on just really having an amazing year, but also just that process, congratulate you on that process of taking the time to figure out what works for you and make those choices and be intentional. So I'm just really thankful that you came on the podcast and other people can hear about it too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell us about all the places that we can find you online. If you want to share your art things too, tell us all the places and the things.
Absolutely. I am on all of the socials at Club Core. So that's Club and my last name, Kaur. I'm most active on that on Twitter, though I just generally tweet about academic life and other such things. It's not just about the podcast series. My art business is on Etsy. It's dilexico.etsy.com. And that's Dilexico. It started out as a coloring book Etsy shop for coloring books I'd made of Bryn Mawr's campus, which is where I went to undergrad. And Dilexi is one of the things in our motto. So that's where that came from. But it's grown to be a lot more than that. And also on there is the class participation graphic that I made. There's a version that you can buy and customize That graphic has been all the way around the world to like 27 different countries, over 500 people, like entire school systems.
Wow.
I'm going to try and reach out to the folks that used it to get some feedback from them so I can write it up, because I think it's really cool that it resonated that much. And there's also templates for the infographic style visual syllabus that I created both in Canva, and there's a Word version of it as well on the shop. And randomly, a book that my husband wrote and I helped lay out on all the forageable things that you can find on our campus and their histories and such. It's just, I need to actually make that book into a podcast like short series, because it's just wonderful. So just some random stuff that's on the shop, but the syllabi have been popular, and I love that folks can come in and grab a syllabus for like $10 or $12 and then use it for the rest of their lives. And that's wonderful.
Well, we'll link up all those places and things in the show notes so people can, I mean, I know that people are going to want that syllabus. They're like, what syllabus? Let me go find that. So awesome. Thank you so much again for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
I'm so honored that you spent your valuable time listening to this episode. Thank you. Before I go, I want to ask you, do you have an almost done article languishing in a virtual drawer? How about a new writing project that you just haven't been able to make the time to start yet? How about a piece of writing in the messy middle that you need to revive? Well, I've got the solution for you. Writing Sprint Blueprint. The Writing Sprint Blueprint is a powerful productivity tool for overwhelmed academics who want to get stalled out publications out of their pipelines and into the world. And it's only $27. And when you grab Writing Sprint Blueprint, you'll get my private motivational podcast feed called Stick to the Plan. It's 10 mini episodes of around a minute each that you can listen to right from your favorite podcast app to motivate you during your writing sprint. So what are you waiting for? Follow the link in the show notes to get Writing Sprint Blueprint today. I'll see you inside.